Good afternoon once again. Jeff Benson, Jacksonville, Florida, coming to you today. What we're going to do is take the next few minutes and we're going to talk about superior construction materials and try to use real life examples. I'll give you examples of claims and some things that I've personally been involved in with different types of materials. These webinars, we're trying to gear these more towards an educational standpoint. So hopefully these make sense to you and we'll talk about it. If you have questions, what we're going to do is talk for a few minutes and then we'll open it up to questions. We'll give you my contact information and my underwriting team's contact information. So if you need to reach us, by all means, give us a call at any time. So let's talk about superior construction materials. So basically, for the sake of conversation today in this webinar, we're going to talk about ISO construction classifications. We've done a webinar on those before, and we're going to talk about all of the classifications other than frame. So frame's off the table today. We're not going to talk about that. So these are the ones, these are ISO classes: joisted masonry, non-combustible, superior non-combustible, masonry non-combustible, and fire resistive. And I will say maybe the top two you can invert, but that's kind of in the order of how superior they are. So as you move down this list, they become more superior. So, the pinnacle in construction materials is fire resistant materials. And we'll talk about those in a little bit, but that's the high rise you see in the big cities. Those are fire resistant for the most part, construction. And we'll talk to you about why they are superior. We will list today some pros and cons of these things. But I think you'll find there's a lot more pros than cons as far as if you can afford to build out of these materials, it's just a better product. And before we get into it, I kind of wanted to think about this, and I actually had to look it up. So if you all remember the parable of the three little pigs, it kind of talks about the same thing we're going to talk about today. Well, it was the first pig had straw, the second pig had sticks, and the third pig built his house out of bricks. So we all know what happened there with the wolf, but it's kind of the same thing what we talk about today. So just remember that as we go through this. First of all, increased lifespan, reduced depreciation. So, these things last a lot longer and they depreciate a lot slower. You can go to Europe and you can see masonry structures that are 1,000 years old. These things literally last theoretically almost forever. Lower maintenance costs, so you have things like you don't have to paint them maybe ever or not as often. So there's a lot lower maintenance cost with these superior materials, and energy efficient. I was reading about deep wall cavities as far as the ability to put a lot more insulation in. I think we talk about soundproofing in a little while too, so these things are a lot more soundproof. So you start getting the idea that even if they cost a little bit more in the beginning, they more than pay for themselves throughout the life of the product. And there again is kind of the rub on this. So you have a builder that wants to build something fast and he wants to make as much as he can quickly in the initial construction of the project. And then maybe but then if you have the owner that's going to occupy this building for a long time, so the costs start evening out in the long run. In the long run, superior construction is even better cost-wise. You just have to get over that initial cost, which might be a little bit more. And a little later on, I'll tell you a story about the difference between a concrete block home and a frame home, and we'll make that distinction. It's kind of interesting when you think about that. Increased architectural applications. First of all, you only can go so high with a frame building. So with masonry non-combustible and fire resistant construction, you can go pretty high, as you know. Pretty much, I don't know what the tallest building in the world is now, but it's pretty tall. So that's what it's built out of, and that's why. Flexibility in design. You can do a lot of things with structural steel. It can be pre-manufactured, and then you deliver it to the job site, and they can do all kinds of things with that. Obviously, glass is involved in a lot of these structural designs, and there's a lot of things you can do. Increased usable floor space. I guess I'm not an engineer, but as you build something out of steel, you can have these wide open areas as you walk in a building. You'll have a wide open area, so that's aesthetically appealing. For an office building, you don't have to have as many load-bearing walls, so you have a lot more floor space. It's just superior construction. Almost in every aspect that you can think of, it's superior. Sometimes we don't think about this, but it actually is green materials. Steel can be recycled over and over again. I didn't realize how much of that is. A lot of buildings are completely manufactured today out of recycled steel. So you use it, melt it down, use it again, it could go on forever. I was reading about concrete and how it utilizes industrial waste as a substitute for aggregate. So it's concrete, water, and an aggregate, makes masonry products. And they use industrial waste, and it's safe, once it's in the concrete. So another green aspect to concrete construction. So let's talk about claim stories a little bit. Fire. First of all, at builder's risk, fire is our #1 peril. It's maybe not a frequency problem, but it is a severity problem. So there are big fires. You'll see the apartment complexes burn up. You hear about the high-value dwelling that burns up in the brush fire in California. Fire is a big problem. So all of the materials we talked about today, from joisted masonry to non-combustible to masonry non-combustible, semi-fire resistive, fire resistive, are all more resistant to fire than frame. So we had a building that we insured in California, rather high value. It was actually a single family dwelling, and it was masonry non-combustible. And the fire was coming, the embers were flying. Needless to say, everybody was worried. The owner of the home was worried. Me as the underwriter was worried. But we had a masonry product on the roof, and the walls were masonry. So needless to say, the building survived the fire, and it would not have survived if it had been a frame structure. So pretty simple application of this. We are starting to see more and more masonry homes being built around the country. South Florida has kind of learned their lessons, so you see a lot of masonry homes built down there, and maybe not just for the fire, but for the next thing we talk about. And I think you will see more as time goes on. Simple as that. Windstorm kind of goes without saying, but a masonry building does better in the wind. If you have a masonry building and the roof is tied down correctly, it can withstand lateral wind loads of hundreds of miles an hour. So, it just does better in the wind. So I can tell you many, many examples of buildings where you have neighborhoods where maybe everything was destroyed and there was one masonry building there and it survived. So, and even we talked about joisted masonry a little bit. Don't use that as much as they used to, but if you had a concrete block home with wood trusses, it still would do better than 100% frame structure. In the fire, the wind, flood being the last piece too. Flood pretty much, I've seen it destroy everything. Salt water pretty much destroys everything it touches. But I have seen masonry non-combustible homes or masonry buildings that have experienced a flood. As long as the water's not there too long, they can dry them out and they'll be okay. Now, interior drywall, electrical, all of that stuff is ruined, but the structure itself will survive. To give you a little idea, I used to be a big scuba diver, and we have artificial reefs in Jacksonville, Florida. And so what do you think the reefs are made out of? A lot of times the reefs are made out of concrete. We have used concrete from a building project or a road project. We would take it offshore and place it offshore and actually build reefs out of it. There's reefs offshore in Jacksonville that are 50 years old, made out of concrete, and they're still there. So I guess they're water resistant if they can survive as being, functioning as an artificial reef. So I thought that was a good story. By far superior construction for claims. Talk a little bit about our program and just why we want to write this class of business or these construction classifications. We have a very broad coverage form. We're very proud of that. We have a lot of 19 automatic coverages. We have optional coverages, flood, quake, we can write. So we have very good coverages. We have underwriting expertise. We have a team of underwriters that understands and recognizes superior construction. We definitely want to write it. We have a broad eligibility. So we write residential, we write commercial, we write renovations. We'll even look at some of your specialty projects. We'll take a look at it, send it to us, and maybe we can do something for you. We're very responsive, so pick up the phone and call us. We love to talk to you about it. Send us an email, anything we can do. We want to make it as easy as possible. You know, even if it's a lower valued structure, by all means, we want to make it easy for you. So give us a call. And we are very competitive. We pride ourselves on that. So kind of that and the whole package is we would like to take a look at all of your non-frame projects, all the superior construction projects. That was a pretty quick little webinar today. I knew it'd go pretty quick. So I think what I'll do now is open it up to questions. And let's go back one. We're going to be looking at this previous. So let's open it up to questions and see if you have any questions on superior construction.
All right, Jeff, it looks like nothing's coming yet, but why don't we give our viewers a few minutes to
All right, I did forget one of my stories. I got one more story to tell you, and we'll see if we can't get a question in there. So years ago, I lived in a concrete block home. It was joisted masonry. So concrete blocks, solid concrete block walls, and wood joists. It was an older home, and I lived in it, and I was always amazed at how quiet it was when I was inside. Never had termite problems. It was just an interesting experience. And now it was kind of a simple home, didn't have a lot of ornate stuff on it. It was just concrete block. So my current home, which I moved into a long time ago now, is frame with the stucco outside. It's pretty much the way they're built in Florida. And over the years, we've been here since 2002. So it's 18 years we've lived in this home. We're constantly fighting. Well, we got the termites, we got termite bond, but we've had a little termite damage here and there. We've had to take care of that. We've had a little water intrusion around the windows. So what happens with a stucco home is the water gets behind the stucco and you get a little wood rot. And maybe you don't even see it. You don't know it's there until it's, we'll call symptomatic. And by that time, you got to tear out the drywall, or you got to tear out the sheetrock, the stucco. You got to fix the wood rot, put new windows on. So this probably would not have happened if it had been built out of a masonry product. So it's just, these are firsthand experiences that, you know, maybe a joisted masonry structure is maybe 25% more to build initially, but the lifespan and the lack of maintenance definitely would pay for itself over the years. So just firsthand experience of these things. So I think in the future, you're going to see more and more masonry products being used. So any questions pop up yet?
We got a couple. Here's the first one. So going back to when you were talking about green materials, can you talk about how concrete is green?
Well, that was kind of it. It was using that industrial waste as part of this called the aggregator for concrete. So what else would you do with the waste instead of just having to put it in the environment that can actually use it to build something? So in their estimation, that makes it a green material, which I'd never looked at it that way before. So it is, you know, you're taking waste and recycling it basically, just like steel's recycled too all the time.
All right. What about cold formed steel frame buildings?
I liked everything that was in that description. So cold formed steel buildings. I mean, and we didn't really go into the exact ISO definition of this, but if you have a steel structure and it has a masonry coating and it has at least, I think, a 2-hour fire rating, I have to look that up, then it's classified as fire resistive. So it's all based on the load bearing aspects of the building. They need to be steel and concrete for fire resistive, or they could be masonry non-combustible. And it's all about steel does better when it's encased in concrete than as opposed to just steel by itself. So, you know, I've seen some instances where it might be, and I didn't really touch on this either. There's another ISO classification called ISO 8, and that is superior non-combustible. It's a little more lightweight steel, but it is built to withstand stronger lateral wind loads. It's got more fire resistance. So even though it's non-combustible, it's very close to masonry non-combustible as far as how it performs in a fire and in wind and things like that. So always remember ISO 8 is a very good classification in construction. Hopefully that answered the question.
All right. So are there any specific types of projects you prefer to see versus those that you don't have an appetite for?
Okay, our program is all built around structures. When I say a structure, it's got to be an office building, a bank, a jail, a school, a house. It has to be a structure. We are not into infrastructure projects. We don't do bridges and roads and things of that nature. That's just for our projects. But we will, if you have an unusual thing, we will take a look at it. I can't promise anything, but we did quote the other day, we quoted a Navy destroyer that was being retrofitted as a museum. So we took a look at it and quoted it. So it just gives you an unusual steel structure that we looked at. If it's truly steel, we'll do our best to see if we can't help you out with that. But for the most part, it has to be a building, I guess, as a structure. So.
All right. Next question. Is your product available in Hawaii?
We are in 49 states plus the District of Columbia. The only state we are not in is the beautiful state of Hawaii. I'm working on that, but maybe down the road. But for now, we are not in Hawaii. Funny story though, years ago when first opened the program, guess where an agent was? The very first agent that ever called me that had a risk they wanted to place. Guess where they were from? Hawaii. We're working on it.
All right, Jeff, it looks like there's no more questions for today, so we can give everyone a little time back in their schedules.
All right, well, let's put it here. The next webinar we have is on May 6th. We're going to revisit protection classes because we get this question every day. We'll talk about the new X classes, 4X, 5X, 6X, et cetera. And we'll all become experts on protection class, which is critical to builders' risk. We did the questions, and there I am, and there's Donna. If you have any questions whatsoever, as always, do not hesitate to email me and call me. We are here to help you. Have a great day, everybody. Stay healthy.